the rigors of science is very important to emphasize. So, although administrator ako sa ngayon, June 1 lang muna mag-start. I don't see myself relegating any sort of my research responsibilities. In fact, galing lang ako sa research meeting sa baba, kayo na yung nakita ko nasa so, of course, bilang scientist, ang hirap ng iwanan. Hindi mo talaga actually iwanan. So, hindi mo rin makapagpunan. So, siguro sa major breakthroughs, nung PhD ko, yun, ako nagbigay ng evidence na ang mga dugong ay may mahalagang ecological role sa ecosystem. Siguro, sa ngayon, ang aking mga ginagawang may breakthrough ay na-understand natin yung strandings na may mammal sa Philippines. And of course, apart from trying to elevate the mainstream environmental science in the context of the Philippines, kasi alam niyo naman, napakaraming nag-environmental science kung ito sa Philippines. Isa sa mga issues kung bakit napakahirap i-mainstream na environmental science is so fragmented. May nagpa-flooding, may nagka-climate change, pero hindi sila nakapaloob sa isang institution na talagang environmental science kasi marami lang nauna eh. So ang hirap makisaw-saw as an institute of environmental science. So we're trying to find our own niche. So it's quite difficult and challenging. So kanina natin kami dito sa meeting sa Fisher, Picard, we're trying to look for ano ba yung hindi pa nagagawa ng yung science is into climate change. Mawala is into climate change. Needs, bata pang ISM, it's just a 12-year-old institution. So, talagang ano kami. So, hindi hirap to compete. So, in terms of that, breakthrough kami na highlighting ang environmental science. That would be a dream come true. Siguro masasabi ko na successful ako as a director of the institute. International collaborations, marami kami international collaborations. In fact, we have work with German institutions on pollution, work with Japanese institutions on meteorology. We work with when I say we, the institute. For me alone, I work with scientists from University of Miami, where I did my postdoc. Sa Silver Sound, San Francisco, I still do some collaboration with overseas National Taiwan University, sa Dolphins and Whales, sa Dugong, sa Japan. So, very selective na nga lang. Ang dami nga invitation sa akin sa international. Pero since ako sa administrative position ko medyo limited na pinipili ko. Actually, always say no sa overseas trip na yun because hindi hirap eh. Ang daming time na i-allocate. Travel time pa lang. Overseas posting, nag-postdoc ako sa Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science where I work on manatees. So, kamag-anak siya ng dugong. Of course, my PhD is overseas din. So, it's a James Cook University. So, most of my, just to give you a perspective, most of my science background is that at a young age, at a master stage pa lang, dugong na, makulit ako. Sabi nila Dr. Gomez dyan sa MSI, sila Dr. Portes, yung nakatanda na. Huwag kang mag-aral ng malaking hayop na mahirap hanapin. Dugong, mahirap yan, di ka pa graduate yan. But I insisted, proposal ko, dinipend ko. Basically, ang field ko sa Palawan, walang advisor na gusto pumunta doon. Bahala na, basta approve yan, gawin mo yan. So I was doing it on my own. I was there for 12 months. Walang supervision, on my own, walang uwian. So,
Tumira kayo dun, sir?
sa Kalawi tayo lang. It's a research. So, it's just to give you concept, perspective na, so marine mammals ako talaga, biology of marine mammals. And then I did my PhD, so zoology, no, napaka-organismic. So marine science, medyo nilagyan ng ecosystem. Pagdating sa PhD ko, doon ko nakita yung pinagdikit-dikit yung kahalaga ng tao, doon sa ecosystem, doon sa hayop na pinag-aaralan. So siguro mahalagang ma-contextualize yun doon para maintindihan nyo yung perspective ko. Na may big picture ako kasi environmental science yung context ko. So yung administrative experience ko managing projects, managing ibang-iba kasi yung PhD sa Australia. Australia is by research and degree. Maasa na alam mo na lahat yung theoretical framework. So, pumunta ka doon, gumawa ka ng research. Isulat mo. Depend mo. Parang so in that context, I was managing my own project. So we ako sa Pilipinas, with that context, got disappointed. Masyado tayong idealistic na duty. After 5 years, na-disappoint ako, I pursued post-doc. Actually, binibigyan na ako ng item ng University of Miami. Pero idealistic pa rin ako, gusto ko magbalik sa Pilipinas. So, kahit nasa Uncut kasi, lonely ka naman, wala kang anak. But sa Pilipinas, serve the country, serve the people. Pagdating dito, pag-alis mo doon, nagtataka yung mga Pilipino. Uwi kayo, ang sweldo mo doon. Yung sweldo mo dito dahil isang dalawang buwan, isang taon doon, magagano. Kaya yun ang mga. So, just to contextualize, yung experience ko overseas, also as a young kid, I grew up in Africa as my father was a consultant for the United Nations. I studied in Australia. I live in the States and also Switzerland. So medyo exposed ako sa regime of different context of affluence or poverty in some context. So doon ko din na-strengthen yung context ko ng science. I think that's what I wanted to say as a prime premier for you guys now, trying to understand R&D. So research and development kasi, kailangan malinaw yung, para maging effective na R&D, malinaw dapat yung context mo naman. Ano ba yung contribution mo doon sa field ng science? Kasi karamihan ng mga estudyante, sure, you're still trying to find your, ano yung niche nyo? Ano ba yung contribute sa society? Technology na ba? Ako ba sa basic researcher? Ako ba community worker? Engineer? Lahat na yan. So, I think in the first context of yung demographics yung interview is just, that's the perspective that I want to get into context. What made you decide to be a scientist? Actually, I asked that. I'm sure, ang maganda kasi nung estudyante ko, mga nagtuturo sa akin, mga teachers ng education ng UP, no? So may dala-dala silang mga modular approach. I think in some context, nakalimutan ng DepEd yun, hindi tayo pumunta niya. Pero I'm still proud ng UP, kakaiba yung approach. At a young age, or challenge to become independent thinkers. Yung isang po siguro science context na maalala ka, DVD skills, yung growing yung seed, but at different medium, di ba? May cotton, may soil, may tubig.